Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kate. I'm the Media and Communications Coordinator at Plastic Oceans Australasia. And today, Ricki Hersburgh from Plastic Oceans will facilitate a conversation with Richard Kirkman, who will share his perspectives on plastics and recycling policy in Australia and solutions available to recover more value from our plastic waste. We welcome questions to our speaker. Please use the chat box to ask your questions either publicly or privately to me, and we will endeavour to have your questions answered. I'd now like to pass over to Ricki Hersburgh, the Executive Director of Plastic Oceans Australasia, who is facilitating today's session. Over to you, Ricki.
Thank you, Kate. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people here today. Welcome to our first Unwrapped exclusive webinar, The Good, Bad and the Ugly Side of Plastic. On behalf of Plastic Oceans Australasia and Veolia, thank you for joining us today. To bring you up to date, before we get started on how this began, during COVID lockdown, POA decided to launch a series of webinars, at the time aptly named No Time to Waste. This was in conjunction with Griffith University. The first session looked at behavioural change in relation to disposal of single-use plastic, followed by the science behind plastic pollution, and then looking at identifying solutions from a government policy perspective. We are today looking to the future by continuing this discussion with Veolia's new CEO, Richard Kirkman. Before we begin, I would like to share a brief history on Richard Kirkman. He started with Veolia in 1994 as an environmental engineer developing services within the business lines of water, waste and energy. In the UK, Richard oversaw the planning and construction of around £2 billion worth of new infrastructure over 2 decades. In September 2020, Richard commenced as the CEO of Veolia Australia New Zealand. He is now focused on building and advancing environmental infrastructure, positioning Veolia as an authority of water, waste and energy. He leads a team of 4,000 employees in Australia and New Zealand, of which I believe some of you would be here today. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Richard Kirkman, CEO of Veolia Australia New Zealand. Welcome, Richard.
What that is if you think about it, 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs ruled the earth, and that big comet came and hit the planet and blew all the dust in the air, and the earth went dark and the dinosaurs died out. And then 65 million years later, where we are today, they'd been crushed down and turned into oil, and we started to dig up those dinosaurs and use them for fuels and also use them to make plastic. So in a way, this plastic toy dinosaur is made from real dinosaurs. It's made from the oil that was made from those dinosaurs. And that's kind of an interesting story, but it's not quite true. It's not quite the facts. And if you look into it, it was actually sediments from the ocean that were turned into oils. And so this plastic dinosaur is not really made of those substances. And I think that's a little bit where we get stuck on the issues around waste management. We tend to go with very emotive, non-scientific opinions about things. And, the idea that plastics are generally a bad thing, I do believe is wrong. And at the same time, I absolutely buy into the fact that it cannot go into the environment and it cannot go into the oceans. And that's why we're so interested to have a partnership with your organization, because we have to stop that happening. I kind of think, plastics were created at a time when we were using animal parts to make children's toys and spectacles and billiard balls. And if we hadn't created this substance and used it for packaging and lightweighting vehicles and electronic components, it's pretty well evidenced that the emissions, the carbon emissions that would have come out of producing a lot more paper and metals and glass would have raised global temperatures and had an even greater impact on ocean health. And our reaction to that is, let's get rid of plastic. So I think that puts us in a worse position. So I think what's really important is that we listen to all stakeholders around this area to see what we can practically do to have a better world. that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what excites me about, I've got young children. I want them to grow up in a pleasant land of pollution free. I'm all for the tightening of environmental regulations, but we have to have practical things that can actually move us on, not ideas that won't be accepted by 90% of the population.
Well, I think, as you know, we're not plastic haters with what we do at Plastic Oceans Australasia, and I think, you've brought up a lot of really, really interesting points there, which stem back to the beginning of time and before we're around, back to the dinosaur age. So I really I thank you for sharing about your plastic dinosaur, because it shows a little insight of where you're thinking, where you're coming from, and I guess a bit about your holistic approach with how you look at things. So that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess on that note, then one of the reasons I was so excited about today was to bring your global perspective, because of what you've been doing overseas for so long, and bring that to our listeners here today. And majority of people, I believe, are from Australia and New Zealand that are listening today. And I was keen to hear maybe a good news story from you, or an international experience with Veolia, and maybe you could even throw in an example of something that was some of your challenges that you've had with plastic, perhaps, as well as for the future of plastic, which you've mentioned a little bit already with your information about the dinosaur. But I'd like to maybe flesh out with you a case study or something along those lines from your international scope.
Yeah, well, I've been in this sector for, as you said, 25 years. So I do reflect on what works and what doesn't work, and what things can happen in our environment, what decisions can we push our leaders to make in politics, and what regulations try to get in place that actually make things change, and what will make things change at a scalable level. So not just a minority of people taking part, but really everybody taking part, and it becoming the norm. And that's, I think, the kind of change that we all want. Not, we can all make an individual change by doing something ourselves, but we need everyone else to take part. So I think in the context of that, I'll give a couple of case studies. I think one was an interesting one was the banning of plastic bags in the UK, and there was a 5p per bag tax introduced, and single-use bags, were not allowed to be used, but if you wanted to have reusable ones, there would be 5 pence. So that change was made, it was implemented, and I had some real thoughts about that at the time, because I thought, okay, that you go to the shops and you buy all your shopping, and in your shopping bag you've got your milk and your cheese and your fruit and vegetables, and they're all packaged in one way or another, and that packaging is quite a lot of material, and then you've got this very, very thin layer of material around all that, which we've decided to ban. And it didn't really make sense to me that you would go for the 1% and not think about all the contents which make up the 99%. Nevertheless, I bought into that. Let's try it, and we did that, and the number of bags reduced by about 70%. So incredible. We've gone from 100% of the bags to 70% of the bags in number. Now, because we were running all the centres, excuse me, we're running all the centres, the recycle bags, we noticed that the number of tons of bags didn't change. We had exactly the same amount of tons of plastic arriving at the facility. And that's because the bags that were now being sold were 5 times thicker than the previous single-use bags. So we ended up with 70% less bags by exactly the same amount of plastic being used. So it hadn't really achieved what everyone thought it had. Now, that said, those slightly thicker bags were recyclable. They were probably used more than one time, and we were able to put them back into new bags. So it created this circular loop. It was a success story in effect, but it didn't create the reduction in plastic use that people thought it would. I think at the other end of the scale, we were really interested to introduce scalable solutions that would make a difference at a national scale. So in the UK, most people consume their milk in HDPE plastic containers. That's the majority of fresh milk comes in that form. Long life milk does come in Tetra Pak type containers, the liquid fiberboard containers, but there's much less of that consumed. So nearly all milk is in these plastic containers. And they have been specifically designed to be recycled. Everything about the way they were made, including the lid, where they would use a certain type of dye to make it green or blue or red for the different types of milk, full fat, semi-skimmed and skimmed. They would use less dye so it didn't taint the rest of the milk bottle. And the glues that were used on the labels were made so they were washable. All the things that went into the design of that product made it recyclable. And we were able to collect all those bottles. We were recycling at the time 300 million bottles a year, which was roughly the amount of milk consumed in London. And we were processing them in East London and putting that all back round into new bottles. And, you know, there were lots of claims made around, well, you can only recycle so many times. It'll only go around the loop so many times. We've been doing that for 10 years, collecting all the bottles in that area. It's going round and round and round in a loop. And we're very effective at doing it. And we've got a high rate of recovery of that material. So a really good news, scalable story around if you design things properly and everyone's on board and you've got the whole industry doing it, it can work and you can get a very high level of performance.
Yeah, and as you know, we do have those sort of schemes here in Australia. So it's really good to hear, you know, that's a huge number, 300 million that you're talking about in the UK. And it's really good to get your insight on that. And also what you said about the plastic bag, because it's quite true. You know, there's a bit of grey wash there. People go to the supermarket, they're not taking their plastic bag, they take their cloth bag. But actually all the items that they're taking off the shelves to put into those cloth bags are still wrapped in many, many layers of single-use plastic. So I guess that kind of brings me into where I wanted to go with talking to you a little bit about, you know, change and solutions, you know, and what we could do and how we see things, you know, moving forward. And I think, you know, still with your international hat on, I'd really like to get your views, extend a little bit more your views about product stewardship, and you know, is that going to be enough to make the rapid change that we really need to reduce plastic waste?
Yeah, I think we probably do need to go further if we want it to be fully scalable. I mean, the CDS schemes are a good move, and that's happened pretty quickly across Australia, it seems. I think it's not quite as easy as it's made out. I know that the first deposit machine I came across was when I went to visit the zoo with my daughter, and unfortunately I hadn't taken all my packaging with me on that trip, and therefore it was not that useful. And I don't really see any other machines. So I think there are better technological advances we can make. Maybe, you know, I would like to see you put your bottles in your bin outside your home. They go into a truck and the truck registers what you put in, and then you get a refund for that, because that would make it super easy for people. They wouldn't have to do anything. And I think the technology is available to be able to reach that point. But moving to your question about change, I really think this concept from Europe of extended producer responsibility is important. And what it really means is shifting who pays for recycling and disposal from local authorities to producers. And if you think about what we're really doing when we go out and buy a product, we're paying for the content. So, you know, if it was butter, we're paying for the butter. We're paying for the container that goes around the butter. We're paying for the labor to put it in there. We're paying for the water and the energy that went into making that product. All those things we're paying for, right back to the mining of the raw materials. But we don't pay for the point of when it's thrown away when we buy it. We don't pay for the fact it's got to be recycled, or for the fact that it's got to go to disposal. And that's a bit weird, isn't it, that we're not paying for that? It would be weird if someone said, oh, you haven't got to pay for half of it. You just, you know, you can have that bit for free. And who pays for that is the local authority, and therefore we pay for it via our taxes one way or another. So it's kind of smoothed out across everybody. Everyone pays a little bit for what everyone else does. And therefore it's very difficult to engender any change, because your single action of doing a better job of recycling it will not benefit you. And I think it would be better to shift those costs to the point at when you buy the product. And it actually wouldn't cost any more to do that, because for the same level of recycling, we're talking about the same cost. It's just a matter of when you pay in the system. And I think we'd end up paying less even, because if you put the cost on the product at the beginning, then business will optimize those costs. They will reduce those costs because they will be in their control. And business is really good at reducing cost, especially when they have their hand on the design of the product. So for the same level of recycling, I believe this kind of extended producer responsibility, pay as you buy, actually reduces costs and also puts the costs in the hands of the people that cause the problem. And I think there's some reluctance to go in that direction because industry doesn't generally like change, but it would create a level playing field for producers of products to optimize what they sell so it has the minimum environmental impact and therefore has the lower cost. So for sustainable businesses, I think it's a really good option to look at.
So do you, in Australia, I think we're not so familiar with the EPR policy. So that's why it's really good to, for you to get your insights on that. Do you think though, for that to transition, that there would be, it could be a levy, or there might be some more governance around when a manufacturer is producing a product of what they can do, more rules and regulations of what they do, and obviously they would have to change over with how they're delivering that product. Do you think that there would be, how could we get around pushback on that? As you said, it's difficult to make change, and very often, even though it might be running really successfully in other parts of the world, if a lot of people sort of feel like, well, if it isn't broken, don't change it, and we're just doing what we're doing, we've been doing it for 30 years, why would we want to change it? So do you have a solution on how we could garner change for people to go to that place? Because it's really bringing all those manufacturers on board with how they're doing their actual packaging to do that.
Yeah, I do think you have to start with what do we want to achieve as a country, as a nation. Mm-hmm. In the UK and in other parts of Europe, there was a decision we want to recycle more items. We want to get to 70%. The Plastics Pact was actually very instrumental in driving that change because most of the manufacturers of packaging signed up to a Plastics Pact, which said 70% of material must be recyclable by 2025. Yeah. And that meant when the EPR came along, they were actually positive about it because that was the only way they could do it. You can only really do it, I think, as an industry if it's a level playing field and everyone has to do it. If you go down the road of changing your products, introducing recycled content, you're going to end up having an on-cost at the beginning that other people don't have. As I say, I think that equalizes out over time and is competitive. But society is paying for this one way or the other. And it only is fair. I think, explaining the fact that it's not going to cost more, it's just going to shift the costs to the people that consume. It's a fair argument. I think it's hard to argue that that's not fair. And I think, in Australia, people like fairness and they do believe in the environment and that you've got a beautiful environment to protect. I think you've got to get people on board for that first. The majority of people on board that we should stop throwing things away, and we should look at how we can put them back into the economy as a viable material.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think there's going to be quite a bit of. I expect that we'll get some questions on that because a lot of people talk about the fact that, as I mentioned very early on, about the good why plastic was created in the first place. It's been made very affordable. And that's why it's been so easy for people to just throw it away because it's easy, it's cheap, we can throw it away, there's more around the corner. So I think with the EPR, I think it's really interesting to see that model and how, you said it won't take more, it won't cost more at the end of the day, the cost is just moved to where it starts, to the beginning of the product. So I think that's going to be a really interesting area to watch here for Australia because we're obviously very strong. And there's a lot of interest and we've ramped up a lot policy-wise with what we're doing with product stewardship. So I'd like to really watch that space and see where that goes. I think it's really, really interesting opportunity for change. And I think we've got to get people looking at that on a big scale, a much bigger scale. How would that actually look? So just to keep moving, I'm interested also to talk to you about the fact that, obviously you've come from the UK, so from overseas, But also I thought it'd be good to talk about, I'm here in Melbourne, and there's close to where I live. I know Veolia is doing a fantastic job with a plant out at Bulla, near the airport, which is a really fantastic initiative. And I thought it'd be really interesting for our listeners to hear about that, from going global with what you were talking about and coming here local.
Is that the recycling, the composting facility you're talking about?
Yeah, the organics.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking that. It's an opportunity just to say that you can't talk about single materials in isolation. I think you have some perverse outcomes if you do that. It's important to understand what's really going on in society when we have wastes, is that there's a huge logistics of material that transform those hydrocarbons into hydrogen. Is there someone else joining us? Anyway, okay, I'm sorry.
Make sure everyone turns their has their audio off.
Yeah, the whole waste hierarchy. We need to look at all the different technologies and solutions that exist for the different materials that enter our homes and industries. Materials are used to convey products and keep them safe into our homes. Homes are built and knocked down. We generate all these different materials that we have to convey around. Once if we can separate them out, they have different treatments that we can then recycle them back into new products again. So for organic materials such as green waste, trees, clippings, grass, and food waste, we can process that hygienically back into a really high quality soil conditioner and fertilizer, which we can then sell all the way down to retail level. We're not quite doing that at Bulla yet. We're producing a kind of industrial level organic material. In the UK, we then went on to bag that, and it was being sold in places like Bunnings, where we'd sell it back to the public, and also at civic community sites. So people would drop their bulky waste off, and they would collect some, or garden waste, and then they would collect some compost when they were there, and save the trip as well, save the vehicle emissions at the same time. And that is a great example of a circular economy. Your organic materials enter the house, there are wastes, banana skins and orange peelings, you can't eat them, and they come back and we can compost it at an industrial scale. Some people can do that in their homes if they have big enough gardens and the time to do it. Otherwise, we can do it as a service. And that's really important for organic materials. And that's the move to increase FOGO collections, food and organic collections across Australia, is a really good one, and it will increase recycling rates. And I hope people will get on board to do that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic plan, and fantastic what you guys are doing there. It's brilliant, and I think there is still so much that we're not doing in the composting, food composting, and waste food scraps. There's so much that we still need to do here in Australia in particular. So I think that's although it doesn't directly relate to plastics, but it actually does relate to plastics, because as we talked about earlier on, the food that we buy is wrapped in plastics, and what do we do with that? It's not just about what it comes in, it's about what we do with what's left over, and people aren't very good at doing that. And I still believe that there is a lot further that we should be going with local councils and our local, with government agencies, with what we do with the sorting and when we do our bins, because we're introducing in Victoria a fourth bin, which is going to be for glass, the purple bin. And people are saying, oh, why do we have so many bins and it's so hard? But we don't actually have anything for food composting here in Victoria. In other states they do different things, but wouldn't it be good if we could have something that was nationally on the same playing field with the systems that we put in place? And at the moment we have a dichotomy of differences there, because each state has different things, and even the councils do different things. And I think that's confusing for the public on what they can do with it. So,
it's not. I actually think it's not that confusing. Now, I do. It's an extreme opinion, I suppose, but if you live somewhere and you get a leaflet or you look on the internet, what bin lid means what, you pretty much can work it out. I bet you know what your bins are for at home.
And I do. But
it's very, very oh, it's really confusing. If I go to another neighborhood, and this is the world over, right? Everywhere I've been, you get this story that not everyone's doing it the same, therefore it's impossible. We need to get all the bins the same. Okay, it would help a bit. I accept that. But it's not the main thing. The main problem people have in getting their recycling right is the thing they're holding in their hand when they throw it away. It's a micro decision. Most people don't think about it. You're not sitting there for 5 minutes reading the label going, oh, what bin should it go? Not for every item anyway. It's just that split decision, which bin do you put it in? And it often goes in the wrong bin because it's not very clearly labeled and it's not clear if it's recyclable or not. And sometimes it's labeled as recyclable and it isn't really. So the labeling on products is a much, much bigger problem than the container issue. So we can harmonize the containers, which is a huge undertaking and quite expensive and difficult to get everyone aligned. But it's probably more important to try and harmonize the packaging and the labeling on the packaging. And again, that creates a great competition commercially, because if you're selling a product, then you want it to have the recycling label on it and say, put it in the recycling bin. You really want to have that, not the disposal icon. So it will make more people make things recyclable.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you about the labeling. I was thinking more about the composting side of it, the food composting.
Okay.
That was because we don't have that nationally across Australia, that there's
Right.
food composting bins. You know, we try and get people to have their worm farms and do it in their back garden. I'm just saying on a broader scale, I was thinking more about the food composting side of things. But yeah, absolutely. People need, you know, as you said, you have that split second where which bin do they put it into, and it needs to be really, really clear. So I think there's a whole piece of work with that. I know that we are getting quite a lot of questions, and I don't want to hold up the Q&A side of things, because I know that's why a lot of people have jumped on, because they want to, you know, ask you some questions. And I would like to go to the chat line, ask Kate, who's sitting there helping us, to see if we can share some questions with you, because we've only got a few more minutes before we close off our lovely discussion. So Kate, if you could let me know if you've got any questions that we can put forward to Richard.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions here in the chat. We have a question around whether Australia and New Zealand should adopt a model like the German Grundpunkt, where suppliers have an obligation to take all packaging and recycle or dispose of it at the point of purchase. That's the first question in the chat.
So, you know, I think that can work in some contexts, but I'm not sure it's super convenient for everyone to take all your packaging back to the same shop or to the shop when you go. I mean, some people could do that, but I don't think everybody in today's age is necessarily doing a weekly shop at one location, and they might be picking up stuff, you know, each day. So the system can be effective, but not for everybody. What is effective for everybody is to collect recyclables at your home, because most people live in a home, and 99% of people will live somewhere, and they can have a container and they can put their stuff in the container. Other systems can work, don't get me wrong, but I kind of think, you know, taking it back to the store has some value, but limited, because it would be, if everybody did that, imagine the supermarket, it's going to be like a waste depot at the front end. So it's difficult to scale it. It can work in certain contexts. I probably wouldn't promote it generally for everywhere.
Yeah. Kate, have you got next question?
Yeah, so there's another one here. Somebody's directing this one at you, Richard. So does Veolia have any particular ambition to expand its activity in hazardous waste treatment or recycling?
Yeah, I mean, we already do a bit of everything. I mean, you know, globally, we do hundreds of thousands of tons of recycling of plastics and millions of tons of all materials. I was recycling around 2 million tons of paper, card, plastic, metals in the UK, and I do want to expand that here. Hazardous waste treatment is an interesting question, because that's incredibly important, because if you can take hazardous materials and remove them from recyclable streams, it makes the other material more recyclable. So we have to treat hazardous waste very carefully. You know, you could include in that electronic equipment. Electronic equipment, if it's not treated properly, can be hazardous to the environment. But if we treat it properly, we can get all the precious metals back and make new, more energy efficient, new equipment. So, you know, it has multiple benefits to be doing electronic equipment recycling properly rather than let it go in the mixed recycling. So the answer's, in a shorter way, yes, very much so.
Yeah, there's so much with hazardous waste that can really improve recycling, exactly as you said. Yeah, that's really good. Kate, do we have any other questions? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I've just realised I'm on mute. I do have one more here. The question is, do you think voluntary agreements will be enough to increase plastic recycling? And if not, what's missing to increase recycling rates?
Well, that's a loaded question.
So I think it's useful to have regulation in place on some aspects, but financial drivers can work just as well. I mean, the biggest shift that has happened to encourage recycling in Australia is the landfill levy, and that's the same pretty much wherever you go. You make an incentive for people to do something else, and they do it straight away. Don't underestimate the power of the dollar. It's more expensive to landfill than you'll recycle, and putting in place a structure of levies that make the hierarchy work in terms of how much to recycle, how much to compost, how much to go to anaerobic digestion and get the energy, how much to go to thermal recovery to get the energy, and how much to go to landfill. We need all those solutions for the different types of waste we have in society to optimize the environmental situation. If we want the best environmental outcomes, we need all those things in place in different proportions. And financial incentives to make that happen and to get the investment is how we need to get there. And that's what we're busy trying to do every day.
Yeah, I certainly feel that if the commercial value of the plastic product was increased in price, that you have less throwaway attitude towards it, and the more expensive it is at the front end, which is going back to what you were talking about before. Well, you're talking about the product, the manufacturer doing the production of the product having more responsibility, but I still believe at the other end as well, if people are paying more for that product, if it's in a plastic bottle, than what we currently charge, I think that also helps make people think more responsibly about how they're going to dispose of it, because it costs them more. And as you said, the power of the dollar is very great. Kate, over to you.
Thank you. So there's another one here around soft plastics, asking whether you think there'll be an opportunity for a separate collection of soft plastics at any point, for example, on curbside.
So there's pretty much, for curbside plastic, stuff comes out of your home, food packaging, there's pretty much three types. There's the bottles, and all the bottles are generally recyclable. So everyone should be able to put their bottles in their recycling or take it to a CDS scheme. That's about a third of the plastics. Another third is pots and tubs and trays. So yogurt pots and margarine tubs and food trays. Now only about half of those to a third, maybe a third to a half, are really recyclable because they're made of one type of plastic, and then 2/3 of them are made of multi-layer. So they're really hard to recycle. So they have to be labeled properly so that only the right ones go in the recycling bin. And then for film, which is the other third of home plastics, so soft plastics, film, that's really complicated because there's so many types of film. Even if there's only 5 or 6 types of plastic used, they're used in different proportions, they have different inks and dyes added to them, and they have different properties. So if you have a collection of them, they may not all get recycled, and that's a bit counterproductive, because then people will find that out and they won't do their recycling, and they probably stop doing their bottle recycling because they won't believe in that either. And you have to remember, recycling is like a cultural thing. It's not a technical matter. Getting people to recycle takes 10 years. It doesn't take 10 minutes. You don't just give them a bin and they recycle. You have to keep trying, you have to keep going out, you have to keep putting the labels on, you have to keep talking to them. It's a cultural shift. If you go back a generation, nobody did recycling. And then they complained about it for years, and now they kind of do it second nature. And then you want to put another bin out and they're like, oh, you're destroying my life, I've got to have another bin. And it takes a while to go around the loop again. So yeah, so back to the question, the soft plastics, I think we just have to think about how can we encourage manufacturers of soft plastics to use less types. So have a type that we agree is recyclable, get more people to use that type, and then collect that type first. And then we kind of move on a step, and we've got this new thing that's recycled, and then we'll tackle the next thing. But if you try and do it all at once in an easy, put it all in a bin step, putting it in the bin is the first part of the chain. It doesn't make it get recycled. You've got to do another 5 things after that. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you know what, Richard, that just leads in with our work that we do, with education, with schools and businesses. It's all about that. As you said, it's shifting the behaviour, the habits and how people think. It is very much about that. And that's where we spend a lot of our time at Plastic Oceans Australasia is trying to make that shift. But we're trying to pivot the shift faster because we need to do more rapidly. So totally agree with you on that. Okay.
And that's the wonderful thing about your organisation, I think, Ricki, is that the education piece is probably the underpinning and most important part, so that we don't make bad decisions. I'm incredibly proud to be part of it from that respect. And I've got a young daughter at school and a young son just growing up, and the fact that they will be brought up in a world that understands recycling and probably know more about it than the average person today is heartening, and it's a good thing, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah, well, we're very excited about that, and obviously today that was one of the areas we wanted to announce to everybody is that the partnership here with Veolia and Plastic Oceans Australasia is a really a terrific opportunity for us to help do that with schools and all the other areas that we're going to be working in. And you're 100% right, and as you know, coming from the UK, Plastic Oceans UK has been working in this education space for about 8 years now as well. So we've got a lot of global data that we're using for education, and it's really good that we're obviously on the same page, and hopefully everybody else will be. So what I wanted to do is, Kate, we've got time probably just for maybe one or two more quick questions. If you have any other quick questions you'd like to ask that aren't maybe in the recycling side, maybe something else, that would be great to share with Richard. And if not, we might have to just finish up pretty soon.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a question here asking whether there's any particular emerging innovation that you expect to result in a step change in resource recovery.
I think one of the critical ones is polypropylene recycling. So the 3 main types of plastic used in food packaging are PET, so that's your soft drink bottle, easily recycled, technology exists, we can do it. HDPE, which is high density polyethylene, and that's your milk bottle and other drinks containers. And then you've got polypropylene, which is used for a whole range of uses, including pots, tubs, yogurt pots, classic example. Currently, we can't get that back into a food grade, and we don't want to just downcycle it into something. We want to put it back into a food grade, so you've got yogurt pots going around in a loop, and that technology is kind of on the edge. And if we can break through that, it will be a scalable difference. It'll be a big new chunk which we can recycle and include in the recycling bin, and know that it's going back to a high-end use. So that's something we're really focused on in terms of research.
Yeah, and is that something, Richard, that you also didn't see happening in the UK and Europe, like that also wasn't happening there? So from a scientific research point of view, is there a gap in the market so far with like breaking that barrier to get through with
Yeah, there's quite a few people working on that technology, and it's not, most of these things are not solely technology issues. Pretty much technologies kind of work or they don't. There's not any fundamental breakthroughs, but it's getting the whole supply chain to work together. So we'd have to get, we would have to go out and invest in new sorting equipment to sort the polypropylene. Yeah. Then you need a technology to convert it. Then you need bottle blowers and manufacturers to want to use this new material. Then you want people that are selling it to have a recycled content. You have to get everyone lined up. And often the challenge is that it's we call it the circular economy, because it's just that. It's all these people in this supply chain. It's not just one person that makes a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, well, we'll watch that space and see where you come to with that. That'll be really good to follow that story, see how you go with polypropylene recycling. So what I was thinking, I'm sure we've got many more questions, but I know that I want to keep on time because we said that we'd be finishing by 12:45. So I thought I would just like to wrap up by saying, well, first of all, thank you so much, Richard, for letting us share a little insight with you with your, your first 90 days here in Australia, and a little insight into you. And I'll never forget your story of the dinosaur. So that's fantastic. And I know I can tell you're going to obviously make a positive change with what you're going to be doing here over the next several years. So I look forward to getting to meet you when I'm in Sydney, because obviously we've been in lockdown in Melbourne for a long time, but we'll be there soon. I also want to say, of course, thank you to all of the people that have attended today. And I know that it's a really busy time for people coming up to Christmas. And we do want to wish you, on behalf of Veolia and Plastic Oceans Australasia, of course, we want to wish people, a very happy festive season, and look forward to meeting up and doing more next year. I'd like to let everybody know that the webinar has been recorded. So for people that wanted to go back and listen to what we've talked about today, it'll be available. And it'll be sent out on a link a little bit later today. Please also check in onto Veolia's social media pages like Plastic Oceans. You can also visit us on LinkedIn, and we've got Instagram and all the usual social media platforms that people can hook into. And if there's anything else, Richard, that you'd like to say as a final note before we say goodbye to everyone, over to you.
Yeah, only just to say maybe as a parting point that, if you really want to make a difference in terms of recycling and plastic and general environmental areas, don't always go for your first preconceptions and for the popular answers about, what we should do. I recommend really asking people that work in the sector and work in the industry. They're all, we are a group of environmentalists that are trying to make a better world, and we do have some insights and we do have some reasons why we're doing the things we're doing. So yeah, don't always go with the first easy answer. Really have a pick at it and see what you think the truth could be. And yeah, just to say thanks for letting us be part of this really interesting journey, and let's change what people think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you everybody for joining us. And for those of you that didn't get your question answered, sorry about that, but we did have a short, sharp turnaround as we tried to unwrap lots and lots of information, and we'll have to do this again maybe later next year. So thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.